The cabin lights of Flight 847 from New York to Los Angeles dimmed as passengers settled in for the 5-hour journey, most already absorbed in their phones, tablets, or the in-flight entertainment. In first class, Victoria Blackwood reclined in her leather seat, her designer sunglasses hiding eyes that hadn't slept properly in weeks. At 42, the wife of tech billionaire Jonathan Blackwood looked every bit the polished socialite the world expected. Perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, expensive jewelry that caught the light with every movement. What no one could see was the crushing pain radiating through her chest, the way her left arm had been tingling for the past hour, or the cold sweat beading on her perfectly powdered forehead. Victoria had dismissed these symptoms for days, attributing them to stress, anxiety, perhaps the beginning of menopause. Women like her didn't have heart attacks. Heart attacks were for overweight men who didn't take care of themselves, not for women who did yoga 4 times a week and ate organic everything. 17-year-old Marcus Rivera sat 20 rows back in economy, squeezed into a middle seat between a businessman who had claimed both armrests and a young mother trying to soothe a fussy toddler. Marcus was exhausted from his overnight shift cleaning offices at JFK Airport, but this flight represented hope. His first trip to visit his older sister Sophia, who had moved to LA 3 years ago and was finally stable enough to help him escape their difficult situation back in New York. Marcus had been working as a janitor since he was 15, lying about his age to get the job after his mother's health deteriorated and medical bills consumed every penny they had. He attended high school during the day and cleaned office buildings at night, sleeping in scattered hours and surviving on determination and the dream of something better. This trip to visit Sophia, paid for with 6 months of saved tips and overtime, felt like the first breath of possibility he'd had in years. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Marcus was just nodding off when a commotion erupted from the first-class cabin. A flight attendant's voice cut through the usual airplane hum with an edge of panic barely concealed by professional training. "Is there a doctor on board? We need medical assistance immediately." Marcus sat up straight, his heart pounding. His seatmates looked around with the mixture of curiosity and concern that always accompanies such announcements, but no one moved. The businessman beside him muttered something about hoping this doesn't delay landing and returned to his laptop. But Marcus couldn't ignore the urgency in the flight attendant's voice. During his 2 years working overnight at medical office buildings, he'd befriended several doctors and nurses who worked late shifts. Dr. Patricia Chen, a cardiologist, had taken a particular interest in him, teaching him basic emergency response during their late-night conversations when he cleaned her office. She'd even arranged for him to take a CPR certification course, saying, "You never know when these skills will save a life, Marcus. Maybe even your own. Please, if there's anyone with medical training, we need help now." The flight attendant's voice was higher now, the professional mask slipping. Marcus stood up before he could talk himself out of it. "Excuse me," he said to his seatmates, climbing over them toward the aisle. "Sir, please return to your seat," a flight attendant said, moving to intercept him. "I have CPR training and some emergency medical knowledge," Marcus said quickly. "I worked in medical buildings and learned from doctors. I can help." The flight attendant hesitated, clearly weighing the absurdity of a teenage boy in a janitor's uniform claiming medical knowledge against the desperate situation in first class. "Come with me," she decided. Victoria Blackwood was slumped in her seat, her skin pale and clammy, her breathing shallow and rapid. The flight attendant had reclined her seat fully and loosened her clothing, but Victoria's eyes were unfocused, rolling back slightly as her body struggled against whatever was attacking it from within. Standing beside her, looking terrified, was Jonathan Blackwood, the man whose face graced magazine covers, whose technology company had revolutionized mobile computing, whose confidence in boardrooms was legendary. This man was paralyzed with fear, holding his wife's hand and repeating her name like a desperate prayer. "Victoria, stay with me. Please, baby, stay with me." Marcus pushed past his own fear and the intimidating presence of obvious wealth and power. He knelt beside Victoria, his training kicking in as Dr. Chen's voice echoed in his memory. "Assess. Don't assume. Look, listen, feel." Ma'am, can you hear me? Marcus asked, gently touching Victoria's shoulder. Her eyes flickered toward him but couldn't focus. What's happening to her? Do something! Jonathan's voice cracked with panic. Marcus placed 2 fingers on Victoria's wrist, feeling for her pulse while watching her chest. Her pulse is rapid and irregular, breathing is shallow. Sir, does your wife have any history of heart problems? No, she's healthy. She exercises. Jonathan stopped, his face crumbling as reality crashed through denial. Oh God, is she having a heart attack? I think so, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. He turned to the flight attendant. We need the emergency medical kit, oxygen if you have it, and aspirin immediately. The flight attendant rushed away while Marcus continued his assessment, drawing on every conversation with Dr. Chen, every medical drama he'd watched while cleaning offices, every piece of knowledge he'd absorbed like a sponge, because learning was the one luxury that didn't cost money. Victoria, my name is Marcus. I'm going to help you. Can you squeeze my hand? Her weak squeeze confirmed she was conscious but fading. Good. Stay with me. The flight attendant returned with the medical kit. Marcus's hands shook slightly as he opened it, finding aspirin and oxygen. Sir, I need you to help me, he said to Jonathan. Hold this oxygen mask to her face gently. We need to get her to chew this aspirin. Chew it? But it works faster that way. Trust me. Marcus carefully placed the aspirin in Victoria's mouth. Victoria, try to chew this for me. I know it tastes bad, but it's important. As Victoria weakly chewed the aspirin, Marcus attached the pulse oximeter from the medical kit to her finger, monitoring her oxygen levels. They were dangerously low. He adjusted the oxygen flow, watching the numbers, calculating risks based on knowledge he'd absorbed piecemeal but never imagined he'd need to use. The pilot is diverting to Denver, the flight attendant said. We're about 40 minutes out. 40 minutes. Marcus felt the weight of that timeline settle on his 17-year-old shoulders. Victoria needed a hospital now, but now was impossible at 35,000 feet. All he could do was keep her stable, keep her alive, keep her heart beating until they could land. For the next 38 minutes, Marcus stayed on his knees beside Victoria's seat, monitoring her vitals, adjusting her oxygen, talking to her constantly to keep her conscious. He showed Jonathan how to recognize signs of deterioration, preparing him for the possibility that Marcus might need to perform CPR. Tell me about her, Marcus said to Jonathan, knowing that keeping the husband engaged would help both of them. What does she love? What makes her laugh? Jonathan's voice broke as he talked about Victoria's passion for art, her volunteer work with underprivileged children, her ridiculous love of terrible reality TV shows that she watched in secret. He talked about how they'd met in college when he had nothing, how she'd believed in him when his first startup failed, how she'd never changed even as their wealth grew beyond imagination. She's the only real thing in my life, Jonathan whispered. Everything else, the money, the success, the recognition, it's all meaningless without her. Marcus heard the truth in those words, saw it in the way this powerful man was reduced to helplessness by love and fear. In that moment, there was no billionaire and janitor, no first class and economy, just 2 humans united in the desperate hope that Victoria would survive. When the plane finally touched down in Denver, paramedics rushed aboard and took over Victoria's care with professional efficiency. As they stabilized her and prepared to transport her, one of the paramedics, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, paused beside Marcus. You did good, kid. Really good. Where did you learn emergency response? I clean medical offices at night, Marcus said, the exhaustion suddenly hitting him. The doctors talk to me sometimes. She studied him for a long moment. Well, those conversations saved this woman's life today. You should be proud. As paramedics carried Victoria off the plane, Jonathan turned to Marcus, tears streaming down his face. Thank you. I don't even know your name. Marcus Rivera, sir. Marcus, you saved my wife's life. I don't know how to... Jonathan's voice broke. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. It's enough, Marcus said simply. I hope she's okay. The flight crew arranged for Marcus to continue to Los Angeles on a later flight. But he spent the waiting hours unable to stop thinking about Victoria, wondering if she'd made it, if the hospital had been able to help her. If Jonathan would ever hold his wife again, the way Marcus's father had never gotten to hold his mother before she died of an undiagnosed heart condition when Marcus was 12. 3 days later, Marcus was cleaning the food court at LAX when a man in an expensive suit approached him. Marcus Rivera, yes. My name is David Chen. I'm Jonathan Blackwood's personal attorney. Mr. Blackwood would very much like to see you. Mrs. Blackwood is recovering well, thanks to your intervention, and they'd like to thank you properly. Marcus found himself sitting in a private hospital room where Victoria Blackwood, pale but very much alive, smiled at him from her bed. Jonathan stood beside her, holding her hand like he'd never let go. Marcus, Victoria said softly, Jonathan told me what you did. The doctors said that if I hadn't received aspirin and oxygen when I did, I wouldn't have survived the flight. I just did what I could, Marcus said, uncomfortable with the attention. You did more than that, Jonathan said. You stayed calm in a crisis. You used knowledge you'd learned in bits and pieces to save a life, and you asked for nothing in return. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus, I've learned something these past few days. I've spent my life believing that success was about building something big, making an impact through innovation and business. But you showed me that real impact is about being present in the moment when someone needs you, using whatever you have, even if it's just knowledge gathered from late-night conversations, to make a difference. Over the next hour, Marcus told them his story, his mother's death, his juggling of school and work, his dreams of becoming a doctor someday, but knowing college was financially impossible. Victoria and Jonathan listened without interruption, and when Marcus finished, they exchanged a look that spoke of decisions already made. Marcus, Jonathan said, I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to any university you choose, including medical school if that's your path. Additionally, I'd like to establish a fund to ensure your family is taken care of while you pursue your education. Marcus stared at them, certain he'd misheard. I can't accept that. I just did what anyone would do. No, Victoria said firmly. You did what someone with knowledge, courage, and compassion would do. Most people would have stayed in their seats. You ran toward someone who needed help even though we were strangers, even though you had every reason to doubt yourself. She reached out and took his hand. Let us help you become the doctor you're meant to be. Let us invest in the person who invested everything he had, including knowledge gathered in pieces while working night shifts, to save a life. 5 years later, Dr. Marcus Rivera graduated from Harvard Medical School at the top of his class, specializing in emergency medicine. His graduation speech told the story of a flight from New York to LA, of a woman who collapsed, and of the lesson that knowledge is never wasted, that compassion knows no economic boundaries, and that sometimes the most important moments of our lives happen in the spaces between where we came from and where we're going. Today, Marcus runs the Blackwood Emergency Medicine Initiative, a program that provides emergency medical training to workers in service industries, janitors, security guards, flight attendants, and others whose jobs put them in positions where they might be first responders in a crisis. His program has trained over 10,000 people and saved countless lives. Victoria recovered fully and redirected her philanthropic efforts toward cardiovascular health awareness in women, working to combat the dangerous myth that heart attacks are a man's disease. She often speaks about the teenager whose knowledge and courage gave her a second chance at life. Jonathan restructured his company's employee benefits to include comprehensive health coverage and emergency medical training, creating a corporate culture where every person, from executives to custodial staff, is valued and equipped to help in a crisis. Sometimes the most extraordinary acts of heroism come not from people with impressive titles or prestigious positions, but from people who pay attention, who absorb knowledge wherever they find it, and who have the courage to act when action is needed. In Marcus's case, conversations during late-night cleaning shifts became the foundation for saving a life, which became the foundation for saving thousands of lives, proving that no moment of learning is ever wasted and no act of courage is ever too small to change the world.